Hi, Andrew from Kensington Wine Market here. Here to tell you about our Benromach 2002 cask, cask number 969. This is our sixth KWM exclusive cask from our friends at Benromach. We love Benromach. It's one of our favorite distilleries. I'm sure you've heard us blather on about it before, but this might be the best Benromach cask we've had the privilege of bottling to date. You'll notice my whiskey's already in my glass. This is my second take. Didn't want to pour it just for I suppose effect second time around. So we're just going to leave it in there. I recommend you pour yourself a little bit. You can start nosing it if you like, or you can just dive right in. It's your whiskey. But sometimes it's nice to let it breathe a little bit, especially something like this, because it's going to get really fruity. So a little bit about Benromach. Benromach was established in 1898 in the town of Forres, which is west of Elgin. It ran quite successfully for a while, became part of United Distillers Company Limited, what we would now call Diageo. And unfortunately, it fell victim to the crash in the industry that happened in the early 1980s, and it was closed. And it lay dormant for 10 years until Benromach was purchased by Gordon MacPhail in 1993. That's where the story gets really interesting. I've tried pre-closure stock and it's good, but I think what Gordon MacPhail has done with Benromach is really special, and this is a great example of why. Gordon MacPhail we've talked about a lot in our tastings, but also in videos that we've posted before. Family-owned business based in the city of Elgin, dating back to 1895. Really, they were probably as responsible as anyone else for growing the interest in single malts. They were bottling Macallan and Glenlivet before Macallan and Glenlivet were bottling their whiskeys, because really up until the 1980s, everybody was focused on blends, not single malts. Gordon MacPhail's been bottling single malts now for well over 100 years. They still have the most mind-blowing range of whiskeys, especially old whiskeys, of any company in Scotland. So it's no surprise they still have stocks of some of their pre-closure Benromach that they would have bought back when Benromach was still in production. True to their style, everything is about the future. It's about future generations. They don't rush things. So I mentioned they bought the distillery that was in a rather rough shape in 1993. They took 5 years to get it up and running. Not because it was an especially difficult time to get stills or equipment, but because they wanted to make sure they did it right. And I think what is most interesting about this story is that they didn't build a modern distillery full of technology. They built a very traditional distillery, and they run it in a very traditional way. They have very slow fermentations, and they use both brewers and distillers yeast. So they're one of the few distilleries to continue using brewer's yeast, and this has an impact. We talk about this a lot in our tastings. You know, the importance of fermentation is greatly underappreciated by most of the industry. Throughout the 60s and 70s, a lot of distilleries started using more efficient forms of yeast, which meant that they could produce more in less time. But the downside of this is that you're starting with less flavor when you create your distillate. So Benromach, very traditional, wooden washbacks, slow fermentations, both brewers and distillers yeast, which creates a very fruity style spirit. The other thing is that most of Benromach's production, their core range production, is lightly peated. This is a nod back to the way things used to be in the space side. If you went back 100 years or even 70, 80 years pre-World War II, a lot of distilleries in the space side were using peat. Maybe not a lot of peat, but they were using peat. And they were using peat because that was the fuel source they had available to them. That's what was normal for the industry, was to use peated malt to one extent or another. And when they relaunched Benromach, they used peated malt. And their first whiskey was kind of a nod back to this, that Benromach was not going to be like all the gleaming new modern distilleries. It was going to be a traditional distillery. The first whiskey that they released of their own production in the early 2000s was Benromach Traditional. We're now well beyond that. The distillery has been running under Gordon MacPhail's stewardship now for 27 years. This is a 22-year-old It is currently, I believe, the oldest, sorry, it's 21 years old, the oldest single cask of Benromach to come to Canada. It is Kensington Wine Market's 6th cask. More importantly, it's our 3rd cask from the early 2000s, 2002, 2003. And what we really love about those whiskeys is that they are becoming really expressive, really tropical, very fruity. And they have notes that are reminiscent of a distillery that we just don't see very often anymore. And if we do, it's completely unaffordable, and that's Brora. It has this waxy, elegantly smoked profile. And you might not be able to afford a bottle of Brora, or even maybe a dram of Brora in the current environment. Certainly not the production pre-1983, because Brora is another one of those distilleries that closed in 1983. But if you want to taste the closest thing you can get to a bottling of Brora at about roughly 20 years of age in the early 2000s, this is it. So let's give this a little nose here. It's from a first fill ex-Bourbon barrel. Benromach only fills into first fill casks. And these aren't just any casks, they're Gordon MacPhail casks. They have the most rigorous standards in the industry. I know most distilleries will tell you in their marketing that theirs is the best. They have the best wood policy out there. That is only true if their wood policy is as good as Gordon MacPhail's. I've found that their bourbon casks are consistently good, very fresh. And even though this is big and rich, and it's got some nice color there, it's far from being over oaked. And even with bourbon cask, first fill bourbon, you run the risk of doing that. And I think not only are they putting it in good wood, but they're keeping an eye on the spirit and deciding when to bottle it based on how the liquid is doing in the cask. What's our ABV here? We've got 57.9%, distilled December 16th, 2002, bottled June 14th, 2024. Let's get in there and give it a nose. Right off the bat, there's some nice honey tones. The fruits start off a little softer, like some nice melon tones, cantaloupe, honeydew, some nice citrus notes. There's this nice kind of bakery scone or French, like buttery French croissant note in there too. The smoke is there, but it's very delicate. It's very clean. This is creamy, nice creamed honey tones, like soft powdered sugar. But I can tell this is going to be rich. I can tell this is going to be coating, creamy and lush. Let's go ahead and give it a taste. Slange. Oh. On the palate, the thing that jumps out right off the bat is that nice waxy coating element that I mentioned before. The fruit, the sweet creamy oak tones, and then the smoke. The smoke it's bigger than I expected. I've tried this before. You nose it, and the smoke is just a whiff on the nose. You get to the palate, and it's just this clean, warm blanket of smoke. Really, really beautiful. Going back to the palate now, some nice citrus fruits, like really bright citrus fruits, some nice melon tones, but it's really starting to go tropical. Mango and papaya notes, bit of guava. There's just like Five Alive fruitiness to it too, like this mixed fruit cocktail. And yeah, I just love the way it coats my palate. I love how creamy it is. I think the other thing worth noting here is just how smooth this is. And that's something we used to talk about 20 years ago. A customer would come in and be like, how's this whiskey? You tell them a bit about it, tell them what it tasted like. We didn't always have things open for sampling then. It'd be like, is it smooth? That was like the big thing people focused about. What I think is really lovely about this is even at nearly 60%, and it's held its alcohol very well, because again, Gordon MacPhail's very rigorous about its casks. It's not, doesn't have a bite to it. There's no rough edges to it. The spirit is beautiful. This isn't Isla peat. It's not medicinal. It's not briny. It's a much cleaner smoke profile. It's peat, but without those medicinal maritime notes to it. Going back to the nose again, just lush and creamy. I'm going to give it a final sip here and look at the finish. Oh man, it's buttery, creamy, lush. so much fruit, clean smoke, nice toasted oak. It's fresh. I mean, this is a big American oak whiskey at almost 22 years of age, 21 and a half years of age, and it's not over the top. You know, the oak is very balanced. It's not getting astringent. There's no bitterness creeping in there. It's just lush and beautiful and really elegant. I'm hoping you're enjoying that. This is available while supplies last from Kensington Wine Market. It is $3.35 a bottle, just 179 bottles have come from the cask, and we've sold about half of them in just a couple of months' time. And the reason that a $335 whiskey is selling that well in such a short period of time is that there's just not a lot of stuff out there like this. Gordon MacPhail, old school style distillery, making old school, or an old school whiskey company, making old school style whiskey at their Benromach distillery and offering people very, very good value. So I think that's it for this little video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoy our Benromach. If you do, you know where to find it exclusively from your friends at Kensington Wine Market. But until next time, Slange.